I never expected to see Daniel again, at least not on my doorstep with a suitcase in hand and that familiar half-smile I'd both loved and worried about for years. It was a brisk October afternoon, and I'd been enjoying the quiet rhythm of my retirement in this small two-bedroom cottage in Brattleboro, Vermont. The maple trees had just started their dramatic color show, and I'd planned to spend the day reading by the window, watching the leaves dance in the wind. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:17 p.m. I remember checking my watch, annoyed at the interruption. I wasn't expecting visitors or deliveries, and in this rural stretch where neighbors were quarter-mile dots on the landscape, unexpected rings rarely brought good news. When I opened the door, the past stood before me in the form of my adopted son, now 32, with tired eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that aged him beyond his years. "Hey, Mom," he said, like we'd seen each other last weekend instead of 6 years ago. I stood frozen, clutching the door handle. Words failed me for a moment, and I simply stared at this man who had once been the center of my world. Daniel had changed. The lanky teenager had filled out, grown broader in the shoulders. His dark hair was neatly trimmed now, nothing like the wild mop he'd refused to cut during his rebellious years. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes, remained the same, carrying shadows I could never quite reach. "Daniel," I finally managed. "This is unexpected." He shifted his weight, the gravel crunching under his boots. "Yeah, I know. Sorry for not calling ahead. It was kind of a last-minute decision." A chilly breeze pushed past us, and I stepped aside, my teacher's instinct for hospitality overriding my surprise. "Come in. It's getting cold." He walked in, his presence immediately filling the small entryway that had felt perfectly sized until now. I watched him take in the cottage, the watercolor landscapes I'd painted during my first year of retirement, the mismatched furniture from my old house in Boston, the stack of library books on the coffee table. "Nice place," he said, setting his suitcase by the stairs. "Suits you." I nodded, still processing the shock of seeing him. Daniel Thomas Monroe, the boy I'd adopted at 10 after his parents, my close friends Sarah and Michael, died in that terrible pileup on I-90. The child who'd spent the first months with me in complete silence, who eventually learned to trust me, only to pull away again during his teenage years. The young man who'd barely spoken at his high school graduation, who'd moved out the next day, and who'd eventually stopped answering my calls altogether. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, defaulting to the mundane to navigate this emotional minefield. "Got anything stronger?" I smiled despite myself. "It's barely 3 o'clock, but yes, there's wine in the fridge. Red in the cabinet." While I poured us each a glass of Merlot, Daniel wandered around the living room, picking up framed photos and examining them with unusual interest. I noticed his shoulders were tense, his movements slightly too controlled. "Mind if I stay a few days?" he asked, not looking at me. "I just needed to get away from everything for a bit." "Of course," I said, too quickly perhaps. "The guest room needs sheets, but it's yours." He nodded, taking the glass I offered. We settled into an awkward silence, sipping wine, the unasked questions filling the space between us. Why now? Why after 6 years? What everything was he getting away from? That evening, I found him rummaging through the kitchen cabinets, pulling out pots and pans. "I thought I'd make dinner," he explained. "You still like pesto pasta?" I was surprised he remembered. "Yes, though my doctor says I should watch the carbs." He smiled, that genuine one that had become increasingly rare as he'd grown older. "One night won't kill you." While he cooked, I sat at the kitchen island, watching his confident movements. He'd learned to cook somewhere in those missing years. The skinny kid who could barely make toast had become a man who chopped garlic with precision. "So what have you been up to?" I ventured. "Last I heard, you were in Seattle." "Yeah, I was. Started a tech company with some college friends. We developed an app for tracking mental health patterns. It did well for a while, but you know how startups go." His voice was casual, but I caught the tension in his jaw. "We lost our second round of funding about 3 months ago." "I'm sorry to hear that." He shrugged. "Business is business. Win some, lose some." Over dinner, the wine loosened our tongues. He told me about a serious relationship that had ended badly. She wanted kids, I wasn't ready, and about traveling to Japan for a tech conference. I shared stories about my neighbors, my painting classes, the book club I'd joined at the local library. We carefully avoided the harder topics: why he'd stopped calling, the holidays I'd spent alone, the birthday cards returned unopened. As I cleared the dishes, Daniel refilled our glasses. "You know, I always thought you'd stay in Boston. You loved that old Victorian. Too many stairs for these knees," I said lightly. "Plus, after retirement, I wanted somewhere quiet. You were a great teacher, you know." Those kids were lucky. The compliment caught me off guard. Daniel had never been generous with praise. "Thank you. I miss the classroom sometimes." Later, sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in sweaters against the evening chill, Daniel grew quieter. The wine was gone, replaced by mugs of decaf coffee. Stars emerged above the silhouette of maple trees. "I should have called more," he said suddenly. "After I left." I looked at his profile in the dim porch light. "Yes, you should have. I wasn't in a good place. You could have told me that too." He sighed, the sound heavy with years of unspoken thoughts. "It wasn't about you, Mom. I just needed to figure things out on my own." I wanted to ask what things those were, but I held back. 6 years of silence couldn't be bridged in one evening. For now, it was enough that he was here, that he'd called me Mom again with what seemed like genuine affection. "Well, your room's always been your room," I said, standing up. "Even if it's full of my painting supplies now." That night, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar creaks of floorboards as Daniel moved around the guest room. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, like finding a cherished book you'd forgotten you owned, only to discover someone had written in the margins. I didn't know why he had really come, what he wasn't telling me, but there was tomorrow for that. For tonight, my son was home, and that long-dormant maternal part of me chose to simply be grateful for that fact, pushing away the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. 3 days into Daniel's unexpected stay, I began to find a rhythm to our coexistence. He slept late, emerging from his room around 10, while I maintained my early riser habits, giving us both needed space. Our conversations skimmed the surface of our lives, careful and controlled, like skaters testing thin ice. I showed him my paintings, he helped me clear some brush from the yard, and we watched old movies in the evenings, finding comfort in shared entertainment that required no emotional excavation. I was almost starting to believe this visit might heal some of our old wounds. Almost. The mail arrived early that Wednesday, delivered by Tom, the local postman who always had a story about his grandchildren. I sorted through the usual suspects: a utility bill, a newsletter from my teacher's retirement association, a catalogue from a gardening company that refused to accept I'd never ordered from them. At the bottom of the stack sat a crisp white envelope from Hudson Bay Life Insurance Company. My first thought was junk mail. Insurance companies were always targeting retirees, but something about the weight of the envelope, the formal embossing, gave me pause. I slipped my finger under the seal and pulled out a single-page letter on heavy stock paper. "Life Insurance Beneficiary Confirmation," read the letterhead. My coffee went cold beside me as I stared at the document. According to this official letter, I had recently initiated a $2 million life insurance policy naming Daniel Thomas Monroe as my sole beneficiary. The policy had been opened just 12 days ago, 2 days before Daniel had appeared at my door. I checked the personal information: my full name, Elizabeth Ann Wilson, my date of birth, my social security number, all correct. My hand trembled slightly as I turned to the signature line at the bottom of the page. There it was, a reasonable facsimile of my handwriting, but with subtle differences only I would notice. The loop on the E was too tight, the cross on the T too pronounced. I set the letter down carefully, as if it might bite. Outside, I could hear Daniel splitting logs for the fireplace, the rhythmic thunk of the axe punctuating my racing thoughts. Life insurance I never purchased. My signature, forged. Daniel showing up out of the blue after years of silence. The conclusion was too awful to contemplate, yet it formed in my mind with terrible clarity. I needed proof, though. Something more substantial than my suspicions and this single letter. I folded the document and tucked it into my cardigan pocket. Then I waited until evening, when Daniel announced he was going to drive into town for some groceries and maybe stop at the local bar for a drink. "Take your time," I said casually. "I'm planning to have an early night anyway." Once his rental car disappeared down the gravel road, I moved quickly. In his room, everything was meticulously organized, so unlike the chaotic teenager he'd been. His suitcase lay open on the luggage rack, clothes neatly folded. I hesitated only briefly before searching through it, guilt and self-preservation battling within me. Nothing unusual in the main compartment. I checked the side pockets, then moved to his laptop bag. Inside a zippered section, I found a small leather portfolio. My heart pounded as I opened it to discover several documents, a copy of my birth certificate, social security card, and driver's license, all items that had been stored in my filing cabinet in the basement. There was also a small notebook with account numbers, passwords, and what appeared to be a timeline, with dates and actions listed in Daniel's precise handwriting. My hands shook as I read an entry from 2 weeks ago, policy initiated. 2M waiting period 30 days. And below that, yesterday's date with a single word, antifreeze. I nearly dropped the notebook. This couldn't be real. Not Daniel. Not the boy who'd once spent 3 days nursing an injured Robin back to health in our backyard. Not the teenager who, despite his moodiness, had helped Mrs. Petrovich next door shovel snow every winter without being asked. Yet the evidence was there in black and white. My son, my adopted son, was planning to kill me for insurance money. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were still trembling as I dialed the number on the insurance letter. After several minutes of automated menus and verifications, I reached a customer service representative named Marlene with a soothing Midwestern accent. "I'm calling about a policy that was apparently opened in my name," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never authorized it." "I see," said Marlene cautiously. "Let me pull up your information. I'll need to verify a few things first." After I provided my social security number and answered security questions, Marlene confirmed what I already knew: a policy had indeed been opened recently. "Can you tell me who initiated this policy? Who did the paperwork?" I asked. "According to our records, the application was submitted by..." A pause. "Daniel Monroe, acting as your power of attorney." "My power of attorney?" I echoed, my voice rising. "I never granted him power of attorney." More typing sounds. "We have a document on file, Mrs. Wilson. It states that you granted power of attorney to Mr. Monroe due to early signs of cognitive decline." The lie sent a chill through me. "That document is a forgery, Marlene. I'm a retired English teacher with no cognitive issues whatsoever." I could hear Marlene's discomfort through the phone. "Mrs. Wilson, these are serious allegations. Our company takes insurance fraud very seriously. I'll need to flag this for our fraud department." "Please do," I said. "And I'd like this policy cancelled immediately. I can put a hold on it pending investigation, but since it's already been issued, the formal cancellation will require some additional steps." After ending the call, I sat on my bed, staring at the wall. The old watercolor landscape Daniel had painted in high school still hung there, a mountain scene with a cabin by a lake. I'd always loved that painting, its peaceful serenity belying the troubled boy who'd created it. Now it seemed to mock me. I tried to piece together what might have driven Daniel to this. He'd mentioned losing his startup's funding, but was financial desperation enough to plan such a calculated betrayal? Had our relationship always been this hollow, or had something fundamental broken in him over the years we'd been apart? The sound of tires on gravel alerted me to his return. I quickly wiped away tears I hadn't realized I'd been shedding and composed myself. The game had changed now. I needed to be careful, observant, and above all, I needed time to decide what to do. When Daniel knocked on my bedroom door to say goodnight, I forced a smile. "Everything okay, Mom? You look pale." "Just tired," I lied, matching his deception with my own. "I think I'm coming down with something." His brow furrowed with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Can I get you anything? Tea? Medicine?" I shook my head. "Sleep is the best medicine. Good night, Daniel." After he left, I slid a chair under my doorknob, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just hours ago. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the old house startled me awake. My mind replayed memories of Daniel throughout the years, searching for signs I might have missed, warnings I'd ignored. The boy who'd refused to cry at his birth parents' funeral. The teenager who'd grown distant, secretive. The strange coldness in his eyes when he'd told me he was moving out. Had I been so desperate to be loved as a mother that I'd blinded myself to something essential in him? Or had life simply damaged him beyond repair when his parents died, leaving a void where trust and connection should have grown? Morning arrived with no answers, only the stark reality that the person sleeping down the hall, the son I'd raised, taught to ride a bike, helped through homework, nursed through chickenpox, had methodically planned my death. And I had no idea what to do next. The morning after my discovery, I woke with a pounding headache and a decision. I would confront Daniel, but not yet. First, I needed more evidence, something concrete I could take to the police if necessary. Part of me, the part that had packed his lunches and taught him to drive, still couldn't fully accept that he intended to harm me. Perhaps there was another explanation, something I was missing. I dressed carefully in comfortable clothes, applied just enough makeup to hide my exhaustion, and went downstairs to find Daniel already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. "Good morning," he said brightly. "You look better than last night." I forced a smile. Amazing what sleep can do. Though I still feel a bit under the weather. His eyes lingered on me a moment too long. "Maybe you should take it easy today." "That's the plan. Some reading in the sunroom, maybe a little painting later." Daniel poured me coffee in my favorite mug, the one with faded blue flowers that my students had given me when I retired. "I was thinking of checking out that trail you mentioned yesterday. The one around the lake. Unless you need me around." No, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "The trail is beautiful this time of year. Take your time." Was I imagining the relief in his eyes? "Great. I'll pack a sandwich." While Daniel hiked, I searched the garage, looking for anything unusual. In the back corner, behind some gardening supplies, I kept a few household chemicals, mostly cleaning products and some antifreeze for the old car I rarely drove anymore. The containers were dusty, untouched for months, except one. The antifreeze jug had been moved, its dusty outline visible on the shelf where it should have been. I found it pushed behind some paint cans, and when I lifted it, I could tell it was lighter than before. My stomach clenched. This was no longer a suspicion. This was evidence. I called my old friend Margaret, a retired detective from Boston who'd moved to Burlington a few years back. "Lizzie, it's been ages," she answered warmly. "Margaret, I need your advice," I said, keeping my voice low despite being alone. "It's delicate." I explained the situation, Daniel's sudden return, the insurance policy, the antifreeze. Margaret's voice lost its warmth, becoming the professional tone I remembered from when she'd worked cases. "Elizabeth, listen to me carefully. If what you're saying is true, you're in immediate danger. You need to leave the house now." "I can't just leave," I protested. "What if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation?" "Then there's an explanation you can hear after you're safe," she countered. "I can be there in 3 hours. Go to a hotel, a friend's house, anywhere he won't think to look." I hesitated. "No. If I disappear, he'll know I suspect something. Let me handle this my way first." Margaret sighed, the heavy sigh of someone who'd seen too many bad decisions in her career. "At least promise me you won't eat or drink anything he gives you. And keep your phone charged and with you at all times. I'm going to check in every hour, and if you don't answer, I'm calling the local police." "Deal," I agreed, grateful for her concern. Daniel returned from his hike mid-afternoon, his cheeks flushed from the cool autumn air. He seemed more relaxed, almost cheerful as he described the trail and a family of deer he'd spotted. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the unsuspecting mother while hyper-aware of every move he made. "You still look tired," he observed as we moved to the sunroom. I'd settled into my favorite chair, a book open but unread in my lap. "Why don't I make us some tea?" "No, thank you. My stomach's a bit unsettled." He frowned slightly. "You should stay hydrated, especially if you're feeling sick. Let me get you some water at least." Before I could protest, he'd gone to the kitchen. My heart raced as I heard the tap running, the refrigerator opening and closing. When he returned, he carried 2 identical glasses of water, one slightly more full than the other. "Here," he said, extending the fuller glass to me. "Plain water. It'll help." I took the glass, noting how his eyes tracked the movement, something eager in his gaze that might have seemed like simple concern to someone who didn't know better. The glass felt cool against my palm, condensation forming small droplets along the sides. I pretended to take a sip, carefully keeping my lips dry. "Thanks," I murmured, setting it on the side table. "So, have you thought about what's next for you? After your startup?" Daniel settled into the chair across from me, setting his own glass down untouched. "I've got some leads on investor meetings in Chicago next month. And a former colleague mentioned a position at his company. That sounds promising." "It's all preliminary," he said with a shrug. "Nothing concrete yet." We chatted about his prospects, the tech industry, the friends he'd mentioned from Seattle. All the while, my untouched water sat accusingly on the table between us. Daniel glanced at it occasionally, his eyes narrowing slightly each time he noticed I wasn't drinking. "Aren't you thirsty?" he finally asked. "You've barely touched your water." "Oh," I said, lifting the glass. "I've been so caught up in our conversation." I pretended to sip again, watching him over the rim. His shoulders relaxed visibly. "So, I was thinking of making that pasta again tonight. With the pesto you liked." I nodded, setting the glass down again. "That sounds lovely. I need to check the laundry quickly. I started a load earlier." In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, heart hammering. Was I being paranoid? Or was my son really sitting there, watching me, waiting for me to drink poison? I felt sick, torn between wanting to run from the house and wanting to rush back to confront him with everything I knew. Instead, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I crept back to the sunroom entrance, careful to stay out of sight. Daniel had his back to me, typing something on his phone. The 2 water glasses sat side by side on the table. Mine, still full, collecting condensation. His, barely touched. Making my decision in an instant, I stepped into the room silently and reached for his glass. In one fluid motion, I switched them, wiping the condensation from my glass onto my sleeve. The whole exchange took less than 3 seconds. "Sorry about that," I said brightly as I sat back down. "Now, where were we?" Daniel smiled, setting his phone aside. "You were about to tell me more about this painting class you've been taking." We continued our conversation, with me inventing details about a fictional painting instructor named Eleanor who favored landscapes and had arthritis in her hands but could still paint like an angel with a grudge against the ordinary, a phrase that made Daniel laugh. Then, casually, naturally, he reached for his water glass, my water glass now, and took a long drink. I kept talking, asking him about tech conferences, watching as he took another sip, then another. My throat felt dry as sand, but I didn't touch the glass in front of me. 5 minutes passed. 10. Daniel shifted in his seat, his face flushing slightly. He loosened the collar of his shirt. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked, watching him closely. "Yeah, just warm suddenly," he said, frowning. He took another drink of water. 15 minutes now. Daniel coughed, a dry, strange sound that seemed to surprise him. He cleared his throat, reached for the water again. A minute later, he sank deeper into his chair, his breathing changing tempo. "What's?" he started, then stopped, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. His eyes widened, darting from the glass in his hand to my face. Understanding dawned in them, followed by something else, panic. "Mom," he gasped, his voice suddenly hoarse. I sat frozen, watching as he clutched at his chest, the glass slipping from his fingers and falling to the floor where it shattered, spreading water across the hardwood like glittering diamonds. "What's happening?" he managed, his breathing becoming shallow, labored. The truth hit me with physical force. My son had poisoned his own water, thinking it was mine. The water he'd intended for me was now working its way through his system. Ethylene glycol, sweet-tasting, deadly if not treated quickly. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. As the operator answered, Daniel slumped sideways, his body sliding from the chair to the floor beside the broken glass. "I need an ambulance," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "My son has ingested antifreeze. He's conscious but showing symptoms." The operator asked questions: how long ago, how much, his age, our address, while I knelt beside Daniel, checking his pulse. Rapid, uneven. His eyes found mine, filled with confusion and something else, fear, yes, but also a terrible recognition. He knew that I knew. And now, in this twisted turn of events, he was experiencing the very fate he'd planned for me. "Help is coming," I told him, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Daniel's breathing was becoming more labored, his skin clammy to the touch. "Why?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. "Daniel, why would you do this?" His eyes fluttered, struggling to stay focused on my face. "Didn't mean for it to be like this." The statement hung in the air between us, both confession and plea. What had he meant it to be like? Quick, painless, profitable? As paramedics rushed into the sunroom, efficiently moving me aside to work on Daniel, I stood against the wall, watching strangers try to save the life of someone I'd once trusted completely, someone who'd been willing to end my life for money. The son I thought I knew. The stranger he'd become. They loaded him onto a stretcher, attaching monitors, inserting fours. One paramedic explained they needed to administer an antidote quickly, that time was critical with antifreeze poisoning. In the chaos, no one questioned how this had happened, assuming it was an accidental ingestion. That conversation would come later, with doctors, with police. As they wheeled Daniel toward the ambulance, his eyes found mine one last time, filled with a complex emotion I couldn't decipher. Was it remorse? Fear? Or simply the recognition that his plan had backfired in the most ironic way possible? I followed the stretcher outside, watching as they loaded my son into the ambulance that, in some alternate timeline, might have been coming for me instead. "Are you riding with us?" A young paramedic asked. I nodded, climbing into the ambulance beside my son, my would-be murderer, as the doors closed behind us and we sped toward the hospital, the wail of sirens marking the end of one chapter in our complicated story and the uncertain beginning of another. The ride to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital passed in a blur of flashing lights and urgent medical jargon. Paramedics worked on Daniel with practiced efficiency, inserting fours, checking vital signs, and administering what they called a competitive inhibitor to block the toxic effects of the antifreeze. I sat wedged in a corner of the ambulance, clutching my purse with the insurance letter still inside, watching my son's life hang in a delicate balance of his own making. "How long ago did he ingest it?" one paramedic asked me, not looking up from his work. "About 20 minutes, I answered, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Maybe 25. And you're sure it's antifreeze?" I hesitated, the momentary pause drawing the paramedic's eyes to mine. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm sure." At the emergency room, they whisked Daniel away through swinging doors while a nurse led me to a small waiting area and handed me a clipboard with forms to fill out. Name, date of birth, medical history, insurance information, the mundane administrative details of a life-threatening emergency. My hand shook as I wrote, ink smudging where tears occasionally fell onto the paper. "Mrs. Wilson?" I looked up to see a doctor in her 40s, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, clipboard in hand. "I'm Dr. Sharma. I'm treating your son. How is he?" I asked, standing quickly. "We're stabilizing him now. Ethylene glycol poisoning is serious, but we've started him on fompizole and may need to begin dialysis soon. The good news is that you got him here quickly. That improves his chances significantly. Will he?" I couldn't finish the question. Dr. Sharma's expression softened slightly. "We're doing everything we can. The next 24 hours will be critical." She paused, her pen hovering over her clipboard. "Mrs. Wilson, do you know how your son came to ingest antifreeze?" The moment had arrived more quickly than I'd anticipated. I took a deep breath, considering my options. I could lie, claim it was an accident, protect Daniel from the consequences of his actions. Or I could tell the truth and potentially send my own son to prison. "Doctor, I believe it was deliberate, but not in the way you might think. I reached into my purse and pulled out the insurance letter. My son was planning to poison me. He switched our glasses. Dr. Sharma's professional composure cracked for just an instant, her eyes widening before she regained control. I see. Mrs. Wilson, I'll need to contact the police about this. Attempted murder is a reportable offense. I nodded numbly. I understand. 2 officers arrived within the hour, Officer Riley, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, and Officer Chen, a younger woman whose notebook remained open throughout our conversation. I told them everything: Daniel's sudden return, the insurance policy, the missing antifreeze, the switched glasses. I showed them the letter, explained about the call to the insurance company, and described finding Daniel's notebook with its incriminating timeline. We'll need to obtain a warrant to search your house and your son's belongings, Officer Chen said, her pen pausing over her notebook. In the meantime, would you be comfortable staying somewhere else? A friend's house, perhaps? My friend Margaret is driving down from Burlington, I said. She should be here soon. Officer Riley shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Wilson, I have to ask, are you sure about all this? It's a serious accusation. Do you think I want to believe my son tried to kill me? I asked, my voice breaking. That he planned it for weeks. I stopped, unable to continue as grief finally overwhelmed me. The officers exchanged glances. We'll post an officer outside your son's room, Officer Chen said gently. Both for his protection and to ensure he remains in custody until formal charges can be filed. When they left, I sat alone in the waiting room, staring at the generic landscape paintings on the wall, peaceful scenes of mountains and meadows that seemed to mock the turmoil of my reality. The emergency room buzzed around me, other dramas unfolding in curtained cubicles, families receiving their own life-altering news. Lizzie. Margaret rushed toward me, her silver hair flying behind her, face creased with concern. She pulled me into a tight hug, and I broke down completely, sobbing into her shoulder like a child. It's okay, she murmured, stroking my back. You're safe now. That's what matters. They think he might not make it, I whispered. Margaret pulled back to look at me. And how do you feel about that? I shook my head, unable to articulate the storm of emotions inside me. Relief. Horror. Grief. All tangled together in an impossible knot. Come on, she said firmly. Let's get some terrible hospital coffee and you can tell me everything. Over watery coffee in the cafeteria, I recounted the details again. Margaret listened without interruption, her ex-detective's eyes absorbing every detail. The police will want to interview Daniel as soon as he's conscious, she said when I finished. They'll need his statement to corroborate yours. If he regains consciousness, I corrected. Margaret reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Lizzie, whatever happens, none of this is your fault. You need to remember that. Isn't it, though? I asked quietly. I was his mother. If something went this wrong in him, shouldn't I have seen it coming? Shouldn't I have done something differently? You can't take responsibility for his choices, Margaret said firmly. You gave that boy everything. A home when he had none. Love when he needed it most. Did I, though? I stared into my cooling coffee. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really knew him at all. Just then, Dr. Sharma appeared in the cafeteria doorway, scanning the room until she spotted me. My heart lurched as she approached our table. Mrs. Wilson, she said. Your son is conscious. He's asking for you. I exchanged a glance with Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. I'll be right here, she promised. Following Dr. Sharma through the maze of hospital corridors, I tried to prepare myself for facing Daniel. What would I say to him? What could possibly bridge the chasm that had opened between us? Officer Chen stood outside a room at the end of the ICU, nodding to me as Dr. Sharma ushered me inside. Daniel lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and 4 stands. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the thin hospital gown. A police officer I hadn't met before sat in the corner of the room, watching us impassively. Daniel's eyes fluttered open as I approached. Mom, he whispered, his voice raspy. You came. Of course I came, I said, stopping at the foot of his bed, unsure whether to move closer. Daniel's gaze moved to the officer in the corner, then back to me. You told them. It wasn't a question. Yes. He closed his eyes briefly. I don't blame you. An unexpected laugh escaped me, bitter and sharp. Well, that's generous of you, considering you tried to murder me. The words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. Daniel flinched but didn't deny it. Why, Daniel? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me. Was it just the money? Was I worth more to you dead than alive? He turned his head away, staring at the blank wall. It wasn't personal. Not personal. My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. How is killing your mother not personal? You're not my real mother, he said quietly, still not looking at me. The words hit me like a physical blow. 22 years of bedtime stories, homework help, doctor's appointments, birthday cakes, graduation ceremonies, all dismissed in 6 cruel words. I see, I managed, my hands gripping the rail at the foot of the bed so tightly my knuckles whitened. And does that make it easier? To think of me that way? Daniel finally turned to look at me, his eyes clouded with something unreadable. The company was everything to me. When we lost the funding, I was desperate. I owed people money, dangerous people. They were threatening me. So you decided to trade my life for yours. He looked away again. I convinced myself you'd had a good life. That you were old enough that it wouldn't be that bad. The casual calculation of it, as if my remaining years were so few they could be easily sacrificed, left me speechless with rage and hurt. The doctor says you'll recover, I said finally, my voice flat. The police will be formally charging you once you're stable. I've given them everything, the insurance letter, the evidence from your room. Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear tracking down his cheek. I'm sorry, he whispered. For what it's worth. I studied him, this person I had raised, loved, taught, trusted. My son, yet a stranger to me now. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to brush the hair from his forehead as I had when he was sick as a child. Another part wanted to walk away and never look back. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. But it won't be me visiting you in prison, Daniel. Whatever was between us, you killed it the moment you decided my life was worth less than your debts. I turned to leave, my legs unsteady beneath me. Mom, he called after me, his voice breaking. Please. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. Goodbye, Daniel. Walking back to the waiting room, I felt strangely hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out of me, leaving only an echo where maternal love had once resided. Margaret took one look at my face and stood, gathering her purse. Let's get you out of here, she said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You can stay with me tonight. As we left the hospital, darkness had fallen, the October air crisp with the promise of frost. I looked up at the stars, bright points of light in the vast Vermont sky, and wondered how life could change so completely in the span of a single day. How a mother could lose a son she'd already lost once before, this time perhaps forever. Daniel remained in the hospital under police guard for 3 days while his body recovered from the poison he'd intended for me. I stayed with Margaret in her small apartment in Burlington, sleeping fitfully on her pull-out couch, waking from nightmares in which I drank from poisoned glasses, falling endlessly into darkness. On the 2nd day, Detective Larson, a thin man with prematurely grey hair and tired eyes, contacted me to explain they'd executed a search warrant on my house and Daniel's belongings. We found several items of interest, he told me over coffee in a small cafe near Margaret's apartment. First, there's the notebook you mentioned, with what appears to be a detailed plan spanning several months. We also recovered your personal documents from his luggage, along with a flash drive containing tutorials on how to forge signatures and create fraudulent power of attorney documents. I stared into my untouched coffee. So it wasn't a spontaneous decision. No, Mrs. Wilson. This was methodically planned. He hesitated. There's something else you should know. We found evidence that your son has significant gambling debts. Close to $300,000 owed to some questionable individuals in Seattle. Gambling? I echoed, surprised. Daniel never seemed the type. Detective Larson nodded grimly. According to our colleagues in Seattle, He started small, sports betting, mostly, but escalated quickly after his company began struggling. He told you about losing investor funding, correct? Yes, about 3 months ago. That appears to be true. But what he didn't tell you is that he'd already embezzled a significant amount from the company before that happened. His partners were preparing to press charges when the company folded. Each revelation felt like another small death, another piece of the sun I thought I knew crumbling away to reveal a stranger. The toxicology report came back. Detective Larson continued, his voice gentler now. The water contained ethylene glycol, consistent with the antifreeze brand found in your garage. The concentration would have been lethal without prompt medical intervention. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining what might have happened if I'd actually drunk from that glass. Would Daniel have called for help? Or would he have watched me die, calculating how soon he could claim the insurance money? There's more, the detective said, interrupting my dark thoughts. We found searches on his laptop about untraceable poisons and how long before antifreeze poisoning shows symptoms. Also information about funeral arrangements, probate law, and how quickly life insurance claims are typically paid out. A wave of nausea swept over me. Excuse me, I managed, rushing to the bathroom where I was violently ill, heaving until there was nothing left but bitter bile. When I returned, shaky and pale, Detective Larson looked at me with sympathy. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson. I know this is difficult to hear. Has Daniel said anything? I asked, sipping the water the detective had ordered for me during my absence. Has he confessed? Initially, he claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that he'd been researching poisons for a novel he wanted to write. But when confronted with the evidence from his laptop and the notebook, he changed his story. He's now saying he was being coerced by loan sharks who suggested the insurance scheme. Do you believe him? Detective Larson's expression told me everything. The evidence suggests this was his plan from the beginning. The loan sharks may be real, we're investigating that angle, but the meticulous planning, the research, all of it points to a deliberate, premeditated attempt on your life. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Mrs. Wilson, the district attorney will need your testimony if this goes to trial. Are you prepared for that? The question hung between us. Was I prepared to testify against my own son? To sit in a courtroom and recount how he'd planned to murder me for money? To look into the eyes of the jury and ask them to send him to prison? Yes, I said finally. If that's what it takes. Later that afternoon, Margaret drove me back to Brattleboro to collect some clothes and personal items from my house. Yellow police tape still sealed off parts of the sunroom, and officers had left behind the subtle chaos of a thorough search, drawers not quite closed, books slightly out of alignment on shelves, the lingering presence of strangers in my private space. In Daniel's room, the neatness had been disrupted, the bed stripped to its mattress, the contents of his suitcase catalogued and partially removed as evidence. I sat on the bare mattress, trying to reconcile the loving child I'd raised with the calculating adult who'd plotted my death. Had there been signs along the way? Red flags I'd missed or ignored? I remembered Daniel at 12, fascinated by a documentary about famous poisoners, asking questions that seemed academic at the time. Daniel at 16, lying so convincingly about where he'd been when the school called to report him absent. Daniel at 20, asking detailed questions about my retirement savings, my will, my insurance, questions I'd interpreted as financial responsibility rather than calculating interest. Margaret found me there, staring at a photo on the nightstand. Daniel at his high school graduation, his arm awkwardly around my shoulders, neither of us quite smiling. The prosecutor called, she said softly. Daniel's being transferred to county lockup tomorrow. They've charged him with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. I set the photo down. What happens now? They'll schedule an arraignment, set bail, though in a case like this, it's likely to be denied or set prohibitively high. Then pre-trial motions, possibly a plea deal if he wants to avoid trial. I looked at my old friend. Will you go with me? To court, I mean. She squeezed my shoulder. Every step of the way. The next morning, a call came from the prosecutor's office. Daniel wanted to speak with me before being transferred to county jail. Against Margaret's advice and my own better judgment, I agreed to meet him at the hospital one last time. He looked better physically, some color returned to his face, though handcuffs secured him to the bed rail, a stark reminder of his current reality. The police officer stationed outside nodded to me as I entered, closing the door to give us privacy. "Thanks for coming," Daniel said, his voice stronger than it had been days earlier. I remained standing near the door. "Detective Larson told me about the gambling debts. And the embezzlement." Daniel looked away. "It got out of control so fast. One bet led to another, and suddenly I was in over my head. When the company started having cash flow problems, I borrowed from the accounts, thinking I could win it back before anyone noticed. And the insurance policy? Was that their idea or yours?" His silence was answer enough. "All those years, Daniel. All those years I tried to give you a good life, to help you overcome the tragedy of losing your parents, to make you feel loved and secure. Was any of it real for you? Did you ever actually love me?" He looked up, his eyes unexpectedly bright with tears. "Of course I did. When I was younger. You were." He swallowed hard. "You were good to me. Better than I deserved. Then what changed? When did I become just a potential payday to you?" Daniel sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of all his mistakes. "I don't know. Maybe when I started gambling. Maybe earlier. I've always felt different. Like I was missing something other people had. Empathy," I suggested coolly. "A conscience." He flinched. "Maybe. The therapist in juvie, the one you never knew about, she used words like sociopathic tendencies and attachment disorder. Said it might have come from losing my parents so young, from the trauma." This was news to me. "Juvie? What are you talking about?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "You didn't know? The court records were sealed because I was a minor. Before you adopted me, when I was in my second foster home, there was an incident. The family's dog went missing. They found it later in the woods. It wasn't an accident." A chill ran through me. "You hurt an animal? And no one told me this before the adoption?" "The social worker knew. She was supposed to tell you, give you all the background. I was in therapy for almost a year before I came to live with you." I sank into the chair by his bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "All these years, I thought your silence, your distance, was grief for your parents. I never knew. Would it have changed your decision to adopt me?" I considered the question honestly. "I don't know. Maybe I could have gotten you different help, found specialists who understood what you were dealing with. Or maybe you would have seen me for what I was. What I am." His voice had hardened again, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Did you ever wonder why my own relatives didn't want me? After my parents died, there were aunts, uncles, even grandparents still living. None of them stepped up. They all knew there was something wrong with me." The revelation hit me with physical force. He was right, I'd never questioned why his extended family had allowed him to enter the foster system. I'd been so focused on providing him a home that I hadn't asked the questions I should have. "The prosecutor is offering a deal," Daniel said, changing the subject abruptly. 15 years if I plead guilty to all charges. No trial. And if you don't take it? 20 to 25 if convicted at trial. Plus, everything becomes public record, the gambling, the embezzlement, all of it. I studied him, this person who was both my son and a stranger. "What are you going to do?" "I'll take the deal," he said, surprising me with his certainty. "You won't have to testify. It'll be over quickly." "Why?" I asked, suspicious of this sudden consideration. Daniel met my eyes. "Because you're the only person who ever really tried with me. And this is the closest I can come to. I don't know. Making amends, I guess." I wanted to believe him. Desperately wanted to think there was still some shred of the boy I'd loved in this man who'd planned my death. But I'd been fooled by him too many times before. "I hope you find whatever help you need in prison, Daniel," I said, standing to leave. "I really do." "Mom," he called as I reached the door. I paused but didn't turn. "For what it's worth. I am sorry. Not just for getting caught. For everything." I nodded once, unable to find the words to respond, and walked out of his hospital room for the last time. In the corridor, the prosecutor waited, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "He'll take the plea," I told her. She nodded. "We'll proceed with the paperwork. The judge will still want a victim impact statement from you for the sentencing hearing. Are you prepared to provide that?" A victim impact statement. Words to capture how it felt to discover the son you raised had calculated the value of your life and found it worth less than his gambling debts. How do you quantify such a betrayal? "Yes," I said simply. "I'll be ready." Walking out of the hospital into the crisp autumn air, I looked up at the blue Vermont sky, at the maple trees blazing with color along the street. Life continued, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. And somehow, I would too. Daniel's sentencing hearing took place on a gray December morning, the courthouse steps slick with ice, bare trees standing like sentinels against a colorless sky. I wore the navy blue dress I'd bought years ago for his high school graduation, a symmetry that wasn't lost on me, one ceremony marking a beginning, this one an ending of sorts. The courtroom was nearly empty, no press, no curious onlookers, just a handful of court officials, the prosecutor, Margaret sitting solidly beside me, and in the front, Daniel in an orange jumpsuit, his shoulders hunched forward. When they brought him in, I noticed he'd lost weight, his cheekbones more prominent, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Judge Harriet Conley, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the plea agreement with methodical precision. Daniel had pleaded guilty to attempted murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. The 15-year sentence was explained in legal terminology that washed over me like white noise. "Mrs. Wilson," Judge Conley said, looking at me over her glasses, "I understand you've prepared a victim impact statement." I nodded, rising on unsteady legs to approach the podium. I'd written and rewritten my statement dozens of times, filling pages with rage, with grief, with questions that had no answers. In the end, I'd distilled it down to a single page. Daniel Thomas Monroe came into my life when he was 10 years old, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I adopted him after his parents, my dear friends, died in a car accident. For 22 years, I believed I was his mother in every way that mattered. I helped him with homework, nursed him through illnesses, celebrated his achievements, comforted him through disappointments. I thought I knew him. I was wrong. I paused, looking directly at Daniel, who kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. 2 months ago, Daniel came to my home with a plan to murder me for insurance money. He forged documents, researched poisons, and calculated the value of my life at $2 million, money he needed to pay gambling debts. By sheer chance and instinct, I discovered his plan and switched our glasses, causing him to drink the antifreeze he'd intended for me. The judge's expression remained impassive, but her eyes flickered briefly to Daniel. I could talk about the trauma this has caused me. The sleepless nights, the panic attacks when someone offers me a drink, the way I check the locks 3 times before bed. I could talk about the betrayal of learning my son saw me as nothing more than a financial solution to his problems. But instead, I want to talk about loss. My voice caught slightly, and I took a sip of water from the glass provided, the irony not lost on me, before continuing. I've lost more than just my sense of safety. I've lost the entire narrative of my life as a mother. Every memory is now called into question. Every I love you, every shared holiday, every moment I treasured has been recontextualized by this betrayal. It's like losing a child twice, once to the distance he chose to put between us years ago, and now to the knowledge that the person I loved may never have really existed at all. I looked at Daniel again, who finally raised his eyes to meet mine. His expression was unreadable. I don't know if 15 years is justice. I don't even know what justice would look like in this situation. What I do know is that I hope Daniel gets the psychiatric help he so clearly needs. And I hope that someday, he comes to truly understand the magnitude of what he's done, not just to me, but to himself. I folded my statement carefully. "That's all, Your Honor." Judge Conley nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Monroe, you have the right to make a statement before sentencing if you wish." Daniel cleared his throat, standing awkwardly with his handcuffed wrists. "I do, Your Honor." He turned slightly toward me, though he addressed his words to the judge. "I can't explain why I did what I did. I've tried to understand it myself. The gambling started as an escape, then became an addiction I couldn't control. The debts piled up. When people started threatening me, I panicked. The insurance idea seemed like a solution." He paused. "But none of that excuses what I planned to do." His voice grew softer. "I convinced myself it wouldn't be that bad. That Mrs. Wilson was older, that she'd lived her life. I told myself she wouldn't suffer. I know now how twisted that thinking was." Judge Conley's expression remained stern. "Mr. Monroe, have you ever been evaluated for antisocial personality disorder or similar conditions?" Daniel hesitated. "When I was younger. After an incident in foster care. They didn't give a formal diagnosis because of my age, but there were concerns." The judge made a note. "I'm going to recommend a full psychiatric evaluation as part of your intake process, and appropriate therapy throughout your incarceration." She looked up, her gaze direct. "Mr. Monroe, I've been on the bench for 27 years, and in that time I've seen many cases of family violence. But the calculated nature of your crime against the woman who raised you shows a disturbing lack of basic human empathy." She shuffled her papers. "I hereby sentence you to 15 years in the Vermont State Correctional Facility, with eligibility for parole after serving 10 years, contingent upon completion of recommended psychiatric treatment and evidence of rehabilitation. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed in my chest. As they led Daniel away, he looked back once, his expression finally revealing something that might have been regret. I didn't wave, didn't nod, simply watched as he disappeared through the side door, back to the holding cell to await transport to prison. Outside, snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes swirling in the winter air. Margaret looped her arm through mine as we descended the courthouse steps. "It's over," she said gently. But it wasn't, not really. The legal proceedings might have concluded, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. 2 weeks later, I put my Vermont cottage on the market. I couldn't bear to remain in the home where my son had planned my death, where every room held memories now tainted by betrayal. Margaret helped me pack, sorting through 22 years of accumulated family life photographs, school projects, birthday cards signed "Love, Daniel." "What do you want to do with these?" she asked, holding up a box of his childhood mementos. I considered the question. Part of me wanted to burn it all, to erase every trace of our life together. Another part couldn't bear to destroy the physical evidence that once, perhaps, there had been love between us. Store them, I decided. I'm not ready to deal with them yet. I found a small apartment in Rockport, Massachusetts, a coastal town where no one knew my story. The realtor described it as cozy, small, with character, old, and partial ocean views, if you leaned out the bedroom window, but it suited me. The sound of waves against the seawall became my nightly lullaby, drowning out the persistent echoes of why that continued to haunt me. The first letter from Daniel arrived 3 months after his sentencing. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope, the neat, precise script I'd once praised when he was learning cursive in 5th grade. I set it aside unopened, not ready to read whatever justifications or apologies it might contain. More letters followed, arriving with predictable regularity every 2 weeks. Some I opened, scanning the contents, updates on prison life, mentions of therapy sessions, tentative apologies that seemed to grow more genuine over time. Others I tore up unread, on days when the betrayal felt too raw to revisit. I never replied. Spring came to the Massachusetts coast, bringing with it salt-scented breezes and the gradual reawakening of my spirit. I joined a local art class, discovering a talent for watercolors that surprised me. I volunteered at the library, reading to children during Saturday story hour. I made casual friends, not close confidants, but pleasant companions for coffee or walks along the harbor. No one in Rockport knew my story. I was simply Elizabeth Wilson, the retired teacher from Vermont, quiet but pleasant, with a talent for capturing the light on water in her paintings. The freedom of anonymity became its own kind of therapy. On a warm June morning, a year after that fateful day when Daniel had appeared on my doorstep, I sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats return with their morning catch. An elderly man with a camera sat beside me, nodding a polite greeting. "Beautiful morning," he commented, adjusting his lens to capture a seagull in flight. "It is," I agreed. "You're an artist," he said, not a question but an observation, perhaps noting the sketchpad in my lap. "I've seen your work in the gallery on Bearskin Neck. The seascapes. They have a certain melancholy to them." I smiled slightly. "Life leaves its mark on our art, I suppose." "Indeed it does." He extended his hand. "George Callahan. Retired photographer, current busybody according to my daughter. Elizabeth Wilson. Retired teacher, current, work in progress." George laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Aren't we all?" We fell into easy conversation, discussing light and composition, the challenges of capturing movement in still images. He invited me to join a group of local artists who met weekly for coffee and critique. I surprised myself by accepting. That evening, I returned home to find another letter from Daniel waiting in my mailbox. This one, unlike the others, came with a small package. Inside was a carved wooden box, clearly made by hand, with my initials inlaid in darker wood on the lid. A note explained he'd made it in the prison woodworking program. The box was beautiful, the craftsmanship precise and thoughtful. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, trying to reconcile this gift with the person who'd sent it. Could the same hands that had measured antifreeze into my glass create something of such delicate beauty? I sat at my kitchen table, Daniel's latest letter before me, still sealed. The question that had haunted me for a year remained: was there anything of my son left in the man who tried to kill me? Or had I simply been blind to his true nature all along? There were no easy answers, no clean resolutions to the mess of love and betrayal that had become my life story. What remained was the daily choice to move forward, to rebuild, to find beauty where I could. I opened the letter. "Dear Mom," it began, the familiar salutation both comfort and knife's edge. "I've been thinking a lot about choices lately." I read it slowly, all the way through, allowing myself to feel whatever came: anger, grief, confusion, the faintest whisper of compassion. When I finished, I folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box, neither answering nor discarding it. Perhaps someday I would respond. Perhaps never. The next morning, I rose early and set up my easel on the small balcony overlooking the harbor. The sunrise painted the water in shades of gold and rose, fishing boats silhouetted against the brightening sky. I mixed colors on my palette, not just blues for the water and sky, but touches of red, yellow, purple, all the complex hues that make up reality. As I began to paint, I realized that's what life had become: a canvas more complicated than I'd ever imagined, filled with shadows and light, beauty emerging from darkness in unexpected ways. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal, a mother who'd lost her son. I was Elizabeth Wilson, whole unto myself, creating something new from the broken pieces of what had come before. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough.